Does this work? Yeah, it does. Ladies and gentlemen, and guests, family, we're going to start with Patrick's celebration of life. I'm his good-looking younger brother, and Pat and I always used to rival over who was better looking and who had more hair, and I was winning for the longest time. However, we are going to talk about Patrick in the beginning because there's other speakers tonight. We're going to talk about Patrick in his time in Kelowna and Kamloops, and I'm going to start with identifying Patrick as I gave my notes. He's a baby boomer. A baby boomer is someone who was born at the end of the war or shortly after. Most people in this room can relate to the fact that they're a boomer of some sorts. Pat was born in Ontario, actually, Oshawa, Ontario, where the rest of us kids all were born in Vancouver and or White Rock. But Patrick was the exception because my mom and dad were serving in the Air Force. My dad was a fighter pilot, and my mom was in the Signal Corps. She was a cipher agent, and she had been finally transferred to Summerside, Prince Edward Island, and my dad was in Summerside doing training, bomber training, low-level bomber training, getting ready to be shipped over to London. So sparks flew, and they decided that they liked each other enough that they asked for permission. So in November 1943, there was a standing order signed by the company commander that allowed them to A, leave the base and rent a house, and B, get married, which they did. No relatives knew about it. That's just how it would happen. So anyway, they get married, and my mom, of course, gets pregnant in about end of March, early April. The Royal Air Force had this thing, like we're talking a long time ago. They did not like it that you couldn't work full 100%. So you were immediately discharged and sent home. But she didn't want to go home because she went to Ajax, Ontario, and lived with Pat's mom and dad, who she had never met. She'd never imagined this. You're being sent to a family you've never seen, and you're now going to be there as waiting to have a baby. So nearest hospital to Ajax is Oshawa, Ontario, and of course Pat was born in Oshawa. No sooner had my mom left than Dad finally got his transfer, and off he goes to London, and he is there for the duration of the war and a little bit further. So anyway, Pat was born August 31st. There's some people in this room don't have this concept, but when I grew up, we had a phone. I grew up in the 60s, so we had a phone, but we had a party line on the phone. So if you wanted to use the phone, you had to pick it up, bang it twice, and if there's nobody on the phone, you could use it. But when my mom and dad were married and they were going to have the baby, they didn't have phones. And of course, you definitely couldn't phone an Air Force base when one of the countries is at war. So my mom, there's a telegram here you should have a look after. That's the telegram announcing to my dad that my mom had given birth and telling him that he had a healthy son. My mom, on the other hand, got the worst possible news, and that's when the person from the War Office comes up and knocks on your door and has a telegram. And those are not good because you never know what they're going to say. So she's in Ajax, Ontario. She had given birth 5 days before. And the War Office comes and said, Flight Officer Reginald Joseph Kavanagh was reported accidentally and dangerously injured on August the 28th, suffering from shock, multiple injuries, letter to follow. So that was her welcome home with your baby letter. Of course, you can't phone and get details. There's no one to talk to. The Air Force was a one-way street. A couple days later, to Mrs. Kavanagh, 2 Elm Street, Ajax. Please be advised, your husband, Reginald Kavanagh, transferred from dangerously to seriously ill list, September, stop, letter to follow. The letter actually did, there was a letter came in October the 1st, October the 30th, a month later, and this letter says, he's off of the terminally ill list. He's going to live. That's it. So there's no cell phone. You can't find out what's happening. There's no phones. There's no nothing. So this is how my mom is living with Patrick in Ontario and raising things. So she decides this can't go on. I've got to get home to my mom and dad in Vancouver. So what she does, she hops on a train and goes from Oshawa to Vancouver. And it's just not a bad thing because my mom was the oldest of 10 kids. So when she arrives there with his baby, she's got all her sisters and 2 brothers to look after Patrick and of course her mom and dad. And it's a nice big house, so it was fine. But my dad didn't come home until October the following year. So it was the war, VE Day, the war is over the 5th of May, and my dad was still stuck at a hospital in England. And finally in October, he sends, my mom gets this cable, I'm in Winnipeg and I'm arriving on Saturday morning, see you then. Pat was 14 months old when my dad finally gets to see him. So it's a different world back then. So that's why I say he's a baby boomer, and so they get together. The good thing about being in the service for that long, both my mom and dad had 3 years and 4 years respectively in the service. My dad got paid $7 a day, $210 a month for service, and no place to spend it. Right? You're on an Air Force base, so they supply everything. And of course, he's a pilot, so he's not allowed to drink. So unless you had a leave somewhere, you couldn't have a beer. So the War Department was selling you Liberty bonds that you could buy. So they came back to Vancouver, and they had each $1,000 saved up in Liberty bonds. So they went to North Vancouver, they bought a house at 542 West 23rd in Northampton. Unfortunately, it was a 2-bedroom house. And as you can see by the pictures, there's a colored picture there of the first 5 kids. That's the year that my mom and dad sold the 2-bedroom house and moved to Cloverdale so they could have a 3-bedroom house, which actually you could make 4 bedrooms with. But they got to work and made a big family. And Pat never did like moving to the Surrey or White Rock because you were stuck on the farm. There's not much you could do. You can't run and play with neighbors where you could do that in North Vancouver. So he spent the next 12 years as the '1 babysitter, right? He's #1 in the family. There's a new kid every year. That means there's new diapers every year. There's more bread to make every year. There's one constant was that Patrick was the #1 babysitter, and he did that. And the day he graduated, he says, "I'm out of here." And he had made a connection in Oshawa with my dad's brother, and he got to work for the Chrysler company in Oshawa, and he was free. And so he saved up enough money, bought a beautiful 1968 Chrysler Barracuda, paid for it cash, a beautiful color of blue, and he arrived back in Vancouver with his car with the idea that I'm going to finish my education, which he did. So he gets a job at Ocala as a prison guard, and he goes to college in the daytime. So he's getting paid at night to do his homework, right? And we always laughed at Patrick. He was the guy who spent most time of all the boys in jail. But he was getting paid. So Pat and I had a similar paths. He wanted to leave the Lower Mainland, as did I. And Patrick met a young nurse in Vancouver, Gwendolyn Jones. As a quick romance, within 2 years of meeting, they were married. And Gwendolyn successfully transferred to the General Hospital in Kelowna. So off they go. They're going to. We visited them on Pandozi in Kelowna, and I thought they would never live. I thought they just liked it. But Patrick had this desire to get here to Kamloops. He liked Kamloops better. Gwendolyn transferred to the hospital here, and then they raised their family here. They have right there, all of them. They had 2 kids, and did a great job raising their kids. They lived originally out in on his ranch out at Cherry Creek. He had some acreage out there. I always thought the only thing he needed was a big Stetson hat, because he was a rancher that was all hat, no cattle. He didn't have any out there. But he joined Kinsman, and he joined the Rotary Club. He has lots of friends. Some are here today. Because that's one thing those service clubs do, is they give you friendships for life. And so, I forget where I'm going with this, is the first person that's going to speak I have here is from the Rotary Club.
I was going to go first, John.
But you are. No, you are. I dropped my little piece of paper. They told me that Art and Sing is 2. You're number 1. So for the eulogy today, I always think these should be an uplifting celebration of life. Unfortunately, there's enough space between Pat's passing and now it will be a more upbeat. But his one and only son, probably his number 1 son, Ryan will give his eulogy.
Thank you very much, John. John, thank you very much for coming on and being our MC today and speaking about my father so highly. Being his number 1 son, naturally I want to turn this into a roast, but I'm not going to do that. I have to say, on behalf of my family, I very much appreciate all of you coming out to this. Some of you have traveled very far. I'm very happy to see so many people, so many familiar faces in this room. There's a few people that I'm just meeting today. And I'm looking forward to having a chance to chat with everyone afterwards, because we're going to have the room until 5 o'clock. And hopefully this program will be about 35, 40 minutes. But we can have people stay and share stories, because that's what I really want to do, is be able to connect with people and hear about that. By the way, Arjun, that's the only time I'm going to come ahead of you. I'm sure. Like I said, I'm not going to do a roast. I'm going to say nice stuff, but I'm going to start at the beginning, which wasn't always great. My father and I did not always get along. I know you guys are surprised, because fathers and sons always get along. But my father could be quite stern and short-tempered when I was growing up. We were frequently at odds. When I was younger, I focused on all the ways that my father and I were different. Now that I have the gift of perspective and I can see his whole life, I recognize the differences, but I cherish the ways that we were similar. I ran into a friend of Dad's from Rotary last year. He wanted to know how Dad was doing, and I was brutally honest in my assessment. I said, he's been having lots of challenges. He's had some really bad falls. He's been getting over 2 types of cancer, and he has lost a frightening amount of weight. But he's also been nicer and kinder, more easygoing, more friendly, and he's not sort of the man I knew growing up. And his friend kind of looked at me and he says, well, that you had a different experience than I did, because he was always a nice, friendly, happy guy with me. And that stuck with me, right? How different people can be with different people in their lives. My father was very smart. I know this for a fact because he told me so. Often. Every time I brought home a report card and I disappointed him, I would hear the exact same thing. You know, both of your parents are of above average intelligence. And then he would look at his report card. When my dad and I could not communicate, we couldn't get along, we couldn't agree on even basic things. We could always talk about movies and we could always talk about cars. My dad was a movie buff, I'm a huge movie buff. My dad liked Bond movies, I love Bond movies. I grew up watching all the 80s action movies with him. I laugh now because we watched all these movies, horribly violent, that was never a problem. But as soon as there was nudity on the screen, he's like, you should leave the room. Yeah, I don't think he actually had a problem with it. I think he was terrified of what my mother would say if he thought I was getting to see smutty movies. By the way, there was a real debate I had with myself about whether or not I could use the word boobs in a eulogy. I decided not to. My father had a collection of movies with our Sony Betamax VCR. My nieces, my nephew, I'm going to explain what that is later on. My father in the 1980s, in the early 1980s, paid $1,300 for the Sony Betamax VCR. I still remember that because it stuck in my head. I also remember that when we were driving home, we were driving back to Cherry Creek and it was a snowy night and the car actually slid off the road. And my dad goes, is everybody okay? And I said, is the VCR okay? Because I was also a lover of movies. My dad loved movies before we came along. One of my favorite stories that I heard was he would take his parents to movies. I love the thought of my dad taking my grandparents to go see A Clockwork Orange. I can just imagine him squirming in the theater. And my poor mother was probably mortified beside him as he's watching this movie with her mother-in-law, how she would have felt. The last 3 years I would have Dad over, once I moved back to Kamloops, the last 3 years I would have my dad over at least once a month. And we would watch a movie in my home theater. We did that right up until the end. I'd pick him up in the afternoon and him and I would watch a movie and then we would go upstairs and have dinner. My dad loved cars, I love cars. Him and I could always talk about cars. One of the greatest gifts he gave me wasn't necessarily about the cars, but what we could do with the cars. And we would do these great road trips. I didn't realize until I was older how lucky I was and how different I was from a lot of my peers, and that we got to have these great road trips. So we went all over sort of Western North America. So whether it was to Vancouver, Vancouver Island, going to the prairies, going as far as Winnipeg, and then coming back through the States, going down to California, Utah, Arizona. We love to travel. We go to Custer's Last Stand, Head Smashed in Buffalo Jump, the Grand Canyon. We were in South Dakota in 1988. My mother was becoming increasingly alarmed at the rising number of bikers on Harleys. We had stumbled onto the Sturgis motorcycle rally before it was a big cultural thing. Now, we were right to be worried because these were real bikers back then. They weren't dentists yet. But we always loved learning things whenever we go somewhere. So we stopped at museums, we would stop at historical sites, and we would learn about the world and bring something back, and I cherish that. Go through here. My father continued to travel even after my mother was ill, and he saw many great parts of the world. So it wasn't just road trips, but he Ireland, Germany, Cuba, Mexico, Dominican Republic. He loved to travel. One of the reasons he loved to travel is he loved people. My father loved meeting new people. He loved talking to people, he loved getting to know them. Through his years with Kinsman, K40, Rotary, Vestas Group, when he was doing real estate at the end, he loved interacting with people. Dad's health declined quite a bit in the last few years. He had a pain in his mouth that caused him to barely eat. It was 5 years of pain and 60 pounds of weight loss before they discovered there was cancer there. At the end of 2019, I was lucky enough my company created a position for me to allow me to move back to Kamloops to be closer to him while he wasn't well. Then the occasional road trip was to Kelowna or Vancouver for doctor's appointments. I'm very fortunate I got to have those last road trips with my dad. My father could be very stubborn, and for several years we were trying to get him out of his place, living on his own, and we also want him to be among people, not living in a basement suite by himself. My father did not want to go. He did not want to give up his independence. He did not want to give up his being able to be the master of his own schedule. He wanted to continue to cook for himself, etc. We had several challenging and frustrating discussions with him over the years, but he finally relented and agreed to move. We found him a great place in Riverbend, and he was unfortunately only there for 6 weeks, but those 6 weeks were terrific. He so loved meeting new people and being around all these different people, having conversations, meeting all types. My father was only at Riverbend for 6 weeks, and he created a happy hour club that would meet once a week. When my father used to talk about people he knew, the highest compliment he gave was this: they're nice people. I did not realize for years what a compliment that was. I kind of wrote it off as a boring platitude. Just something you say when you don't really have a way to describe someone. But as I got to know my father, him more, I discovered that him saying that someone is a nice guy is a genuine compliment. He had been around long enough. He didn't want to waste his time with jerks. He wanted to be around nice people. He's seen enough of the world. He lived long enough to know that's who you wanted to spend your time with. My sister and I remarked when we were going through this that we were lucky to see that change in our father the last few years. We got to see the Pat Kavanagh the rest of the world got to see. And he was a nice guy. Dad, I love you. I will miss you. Safe travels.
Well said. So now we're going to have Speaker Arjun Singh. He's a longtime member of the Rotary Club of Kamloops with my brother Pat, and a longtime admirer of Pat's curiosity and friendly nature. That's how you wanted me to say that.
Thanks so much, John. Ryan, that was awesome. Just beautiful, beautiful words. And it's a real honor for me to be asked by Ryan, Kathleen, and the family to be here today. I would like to start by telling you a bit about Rotary, which is how I know Pat. And we actually we met in this room probably for about 80 years. Actually, the Rotary Club of Kamloops is 100 and some odd years old, and we meet in this room. We've got small as it kind of moves around a bit here and there in the hotel, but typically it's always been in this room. So this is where I kind of first met Pat. And I come from a family. My grandfather was a Rotary member in India. My dad was a Rotary member, and then my dad asked me about 23 years ago whether I would be interested in joining Rotary, and I was kind of intimidated, to be honest with you. Rotary's got this kind of, not so much anymore, thank God, but it was a very, very, status, all the sort of captains of sort of groups kind of in the club. And so I came, and Pat was very nice. He was really nice to me as a young person. Some people weren't so nice, to be honest. But Pat was someone who always was very nice. We also, the buffet table was over there, and we would meet at the buffet table, and he would ask me how things are going, and I would ask him the same thing, and we had very nice interactions. We sat together at a table, the same thing. And it was very curious, man. I mean, so we would sort of sit there and talk, and then one feature of a Rotary meeting, as people at Rotary know, is that there's always a guest speaker at every Rotary meeting. And sometimes, having been a guest speaker a few times myself, it's always a little bad if you give a little talk and no one asks any questions, because you feel like it's kind of a boring talk maybe, and no one has anything to say. But Pat would always put up his hand and ask a question, and it was always a very direct and interesting question, and it would sort of be very thoughtful, and it was really it was great to sort of have that interaction and watch Pat. I learned a lot from people like Pat over the years around how to hold yourself and how to be in the community and how to be someone of service, and noting all the things he's done in his life beyond Rotary. It's certainly the Pat that I also knew very well. Not to say we agreed on everything, but one of the things about being together in a group together, and part of his personality, I think, was we actually, unlike Ryan, we actually we held our differences quite warmly. Like we would be in a place where we could actually discuss things in a way, different views, but do it in a way of friendship and a fellowship and a camaraderie, and it's always something that I really appreciated about Pat. So I don't have all that much more to say, except that I'll miss him very much, and I really hope the family knows that the work he did in Kamloops in volunteerism was amazing and well appreciated by many. Thanks.
If you notice, Arjun has a Paul Harris pin on his lapel. That means he's been recognized by his Rotary Club for doing service, and the motto of Rotary is service above self, and to get recognized with the Paul Harris Fellowship, like Patrick was, you had to do something in your life especially well. Pat had one and I had two. So I got a call on Kathleen, the daughter. She was always the most favorite daughter.
Thanks, John. Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for coming today. It's really nice to see so many familiar faces from years and years ago. Ryan and I did not talk to each other when we wrote what we were going to say, and it's funny how similar, obviously, our experiences were. I mean, we were the same father, but we did have a lot of the same things in common that we had of, cherished memories. And so this is a little similar to what Ryan said. So talking about cars, I mean, we've already said, John mentioned the Barracuda that Dad bought back in Ontario, and talking about cars was definitely one of the favorite topics of conversation, but especially when I was a teenager, because it was safe to talk about, it was easy, it wasn't boyfriends, it wasn't how are you doing in school, so anytime we were driving somewhere, we knew that would be something we could talk about. It helped that he had a subscription to Car and Driver magazine. I think I was probably the only teenage girl that was reading Car and Driver magazine, but it did help that I could understand some of the engine he was talking about, or we would pick out different cars on the roads, especially when we would drive down to Vancouver, because there was definitely flashier cars than what we would see in Kamloops. So that was fun. We did not always agree on what was considered a cool car. When I was 19, he generously offered to buy me a car to replace my beloved but aging, Ryan tells me it's a 1980 Toyota Tercel hatchback. I thought it was an 86, but I will go with Ryan. 1980 Toyota Tercel hatchback, which I loved, but it was starting to fall apart. So the car he had picked out, however, it was a great deal, but it was this awful Geo Tracker mini Jeep with the fake, at the time in the 1990s, it was really popular to have these decals on the side of the car, the paint splatters. So it was white with pink paint splatters, and he showed me a picture, and I was, Dad, there's no, I was stubborn, as was he, and I said, thank you, but no, we have to find something else. So thankfully we did. As Ryan said, he and my mom like to plan road trips for the summer, we spent countless hours in the back seat of various Jeep Cherokees with the line, down the middle to make sure we stayed on our side of the seat. Our family's summer vacations consisted of visiting cousins on the Vancouver coast or sightseeing around BC, Alberta, and the US. And as I got older, I came to appreciate the experience of family road trips and have carried on the tradition of subjecting my children to long road trips all across North America. As a man of routine, used to living on his own, coming to visit his 3 young grandchildren in Ottawa was a big change of pace for Dad. However, he still managed to squeeze in his daily routine of sitting on the couch, reading the newspaper, and taking afternoon naps. His favorite way to spend time with them was reading endless storybooks, playing with them at our local park, and visiting their favorite museums. On these visits, Dad would also occasionally cook for us, and this was a big deal because he rarely cooked when Ryan and I were kids. Back then, he exclusively cooked hamburgers in the cast iron pan for Saturday night dinners. Our mom was a great cook, so he really never had to cook. But in the years after she died, he decided to improve this skill, and he wowed us with great beef stews, roasted salmon, and sauteed chicken dish. He was always happy to share and exchange recipes with me. He certainly had a sweet tooth. He loved desserts and chocolate, but especially ice cream. There was one summer when Jeff and I had done a big road trip with the kids from our home in Kensington, Maryland, to come and visit him in Kamloops. We were walking at Riverside Park and went for ice cream at the local Scoops ice cream shop. I ordered the kiddie-sized cones for my kids and myself, as you do, and my dad proceeds to order an enormous triple scoop waffle cone and devours it. And as he was basically a borderline diabetic at this point, it's really not the wisest choice, but I can't tell him what to do at that point. So Ryan and I both agree that we got to know Dad better these last few years as he opened up and shared more stories with us. And what I will miss the most about Dad is our Sunday chats when he would phone me and ask, how are things in beautiful downtown Kensington? Thank you.
Okay, and we have a note from someone, and Ryan's going to come up and read it. It's words by Doug Clemens.
Doug Clemens, yeah. Thanks again, John. Thank you, Kathleen. I had sort of reached out. When we did the celebration life, I wanted to touch on different important parts of my dad's life. And I was hoping to get someone from Investors Group to speak for him. And one that he worked with for over 20 years, Doug Clemens, sent me a letter. And so I'm going to read that off for you. Doug unfortunately wasn't able to make it, but he sent this and asked that I read it out to you guys. So obviously it's addressed to Kathleen and I. Dear Ryan and Kathleen, I was deeply saddened to hear about your passing of your father, Pat. He was a kind and generous man, and I feel grateful to have had the opportunity to know him and work alongside him at Investor Group for over 20 years. Pat was a seasoned veteran in the industry and mentored many new hires, including myself. His guidance and support were instrumental in my early success, for which I am truly thankful. Pat's impact was not just limited to his clients and colleagues, but also extended to the entire regional office. His infectious laughter that could be heard from his office during client meetings set a positive vibe for everyone around him. I have fond memories of attending countless Investors Group social events and conventions with him, along with your late mother, Gwen, and my wife, Megan. Pat had a cutting sense of humor. Thankfully, I didn't get that right, babe. Pat had a cutting sense of humor and was always the life of the party. Although we didn't get to see each other as frequently after his retirement from Investor Group 17 years ago, I'll always cherish the memories I have of Pat. He was a hardworking family man with a heart of gold, and I know he'll be deeply missed by all who knew him. Please know that my thoughts and condolences are with you and your family, and for all who love Pat during this difficult time. I wish I could be there in person to celebrate Pat's life with you, but unfortunately I'll be unable to attend due to a prior commitment. I hope this letter can serve as a small tribute to Pat's memory and the impact he had on the lives of those around him. Sincerely, Doug Clemens.
Thank you. I'm just going to say that the microphone is going to be open to anyone who wants to say a word or two. I said all I want to say. Everyone who has a brother never wants to lose a brother. However, he did live a long life, and in the end, he went quickly. So you can't ask for much better than that, because we know other people who are struggling in their lives. So, and end of life is never easy. I remember years ago, Patrick phoned me and he says, Gwen and I are coming into the city on the weekend. How about we get together for a nice dinner? In those days, we had a late night ferry, so Chris and I actually could go into the city, have dinner, and then get home without having to stay overnight. So we did that. We went to the Kettle of Fish, had a nice dinner. But unfortunately, Gwen was sloughing her right foot. And when I opened the door for her, I didn't know that she had MS. We were told that night over dinner that she had come into the city to sign up for a drug test. They were going to do an experimental drug, and because she, with her nursing background, knew that her MS was terminal, it wasn't going to last long. So she had signed up for this, and we were just, we both cried all the way home. It was just terrible to find this out, because she was such a beautiful lady, made a beautiful family. But anyway, so I didn't think I was gonna, when you get 4 months between death and now, you're not supposed to do that. But anyway, anyone would like to say anything, you're more than welcome to come up. Here's a newcomer to Kamloops. Only got here at 65.
Why don't they call you Uncle John?
Why don't they?
Yeah. Well, Uncle John, it's nice to meet you today. My name is Bob Iverson, a longtime kinsman K40, longtime associate of Pat's. I knew Pat as a quiet individual. I didn't know him as a party goer, but I do know that he could be entertained. And I want to tell you a quick story about his entertaining. He had recently joined Kinsman, and going to his first convention with his wonderful wife, Gwen. She was so quiet, such a sweetheart. We're in either Kelowna or Penticton, whichever it was. I think Kelowna, Gary thinks Penticton. Near the twain shall meet. Anyways, it's a Saturday afternoon, a beautiful sunny day, and we were all gathered socially. A bunch of us that didn't have business to do gathered socially in one of the rooms, and we're chit-chatting and wondering, where's Pat? We better go find Pat. So we knew where he was. We knew his room, but we didn't know he was in the room. We'll go find him. So we go barnstorming up on the balcony and along to his room, bang on the door and open it up. And Pat and Gwen, being relatively newly married, are celebrating. It was embarrassing for everybody, but from that point on, Pat was nicknamed the Entertainer. We'll all miss Pat. I think I was talking to one of the number one son and advising him of the death of another kinsman, K40, and he gave me the news that Pat had passed on. I was sorry to hear it, and we will miss him. Thank you. Is that delicate enough?
I didn't think you were going to tell that story. he told me that story earlier, and I had no idea that he would stand up and. But he said they were newlyweds.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jim Collins. I'm one of Pat's cousins. I don't really want to tell any of the stories, but I just, at one point, there were scores of cousins. Not so many now because we're getting old, but scores of cousins. Pat was the senior one. And just wanted to, on behalf of all the cousins that are past, present, just to acknowledge that Pat was a leader in many things over the years, sometimes not so good, but he always stood out as the boss cousin. Remember him fondly.
Thank you, Jim. we found an investor's person here. Oh, no, you can roast.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Donovan. I worked in IG Wealth with Pat for the latter years. I guess it was still pretty close to 10 or 13 years we were together. And when I moved here and joined IG, Pat was the official first person I met. And Pat was without question one of the most approachable people in the office. He always had a kind word. As Doug Clemens said in the letter, you knew Pat was in the office because you could hear him laugh. Now, like any other institution, we've all worked somewhere. We all have been with a lot of people. Everybody tends to build up a reputation around something. Well, Pat did have a bit of a reputation in the office. At IG, we're big fans of going for lunch. We love to go for lunch. And the nice thing about going for lunch is generally if someone invited you, they foot the bill. But Pat had a reputation of somehow, what would the word be? Frugal, I guess?
He was careful.
Careful.
That's the word he chose.
Okay, you managed to get a word into your speech. I'm trying to avoid cheap. So frugal would be the word. And it became a topic of conversation, one of endless amazement at how many lunches Pat managed to get to and never foot the bill. He was a genius at it, a mastermind, you would say, of the free lunch. Now, being a younger representative, I was 23 at the time when I met Pat, and it had to be about 5 years into the career, and I was well aware of Pat's reputation of being the master at lunch. But Pat shocked me this day when he came to my office and said, Donovan, do you want to go for lunch? Okay, I'm in shock. Pat, I'd love to go for lunch. So Pat and I went for lunch. So at the end of lunch, even being a young, starving representative at IG Wealth, I pull out my wallet, and lo and behold, Pat paid the bill. Because when it came right down to it, Pat was a nice man. Thank you.
Should I bring this to a close and say to Pat's grandkids, good luck hunting for your university of choice. The one daughter just finished first year at Waterloo Western, and one daughter is going to UVic or something. So look, university shopping this week, just kicking tires. And so maybe they'll be back to going to university in a couple of years. So anyway, enjoy your week in Victoria. And thank you all for coming. It's well appreciated by everybody. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. I appreciate it. We're just going to play one of Dan's favorite songs right now to end this, and then afterwards, I'm hoping you guys will stay so we can all share stories, more stories. Maybe Bob, I've heard enough stories from you, but the rest of you, we can have some good stories. That'd be great. But I just think if you can do that up, thank you.